Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mick Buchanan, Director of Los Angeles Chess Club, and we're in the month of April 2017. So the topic for this month is World Champions Classics. So I'll be showing you guys a few games from World Champions. First game that I've selected is from our 16th current World Champion, Magnus Carlsen. But at the time that he played this game, which was in 2011 in the Balboa Masters tournament, he was not World Champion yet. Here's a game that Magnus played against another Super GM at the time, Vasily Ivanchuk. Ivanchuk is another one of the great players who never became World Champion, and because of his age, he probably never will. But what I liked about this game mostly was because Carlsen played my favorite line against e4, which is French. And you don't see Carlsen very often playing French. These days, almost exclusively against e4, he plays e5. So you could say at the time he was experimenting with different openings to come up with a solid opening repertoire. So d4, d5. At the very top level, Super GM level, they played the objectively best moves. And what's the objectively best move here?
Knight c3.
Knight c3. Pawn takes is the best line for black because no more bad bishop, right? You don't see this very often unless somebody makes a prepared line. Like Kasparov one time played against Korchnoi. He played exchange variation followed by queen f3. But he had prepared, he had spotted some weakness in the way that Korchnoi was handling that line. But knight c3 is almost exclusively is what you see these days. On knight c3, black played knight f6. By the way, at this point, black has two major continuations. The tactical bishop b4, which is called the Wiener variation, or the positional knight f6. So Carlsen played this line, the usual continuations, e5, knight of d7, and f4. This line, f4, has been very popular, and even today is best continuation for white. And I've been on the black side of this variation at least a dozen times in tournament games. And those who play French, and their classical knight c3, knight f6, they're bound to face this. So we have a locked up pawn center. In the month that we talked about metagame, when we said the central pawns are locked up, what are the best ways to continue for both sides?
Play on the wings.
Play on the wings. Which wing and for whom, you got to figure that out. Black's central pawn formation is heading towards queen side. That indicates that queen side is black's strength, black's ace. And this little pawn chain indicates that white's strength is on the king side. So the battle lines are drawn. It's just a matter of following the lines, and it's a question of who is going to outplay the other. So black plays c5. That's the best way to strike at this pawn. Knight f3, knight c6. In some lines of French, like in advance, you see that this pawn is defended with another pawn on c3. So that if black takes, and white maintains these two pawns here. This is an entirely different variation. White strengthened this pawn with f4 pawn. So these pawns could be traded anytime by either white or black. It's just white is trying to hold a powerful outpost on this square. It's strengthening this square with bishop e3, queen d2, and maybe even later on knight ce2. So after knight f3, knight c6, bishop e3, sure enough, black played bishop e7. This is an interesting situation that neither side should trade pawns unless there's some kind of advantage. So white doesn't want to trade in this position, for example, because it brings the black bishop out here in one move. He's delaying this that he may do it later. So black played bishop e7, hoping that white will take, and white played a3. The point of this move is to, at some point, take here, possibly with b4 next, and drive black pieces back, and also prevent a black piece from this square. Black castled, and white played queen d2. That's the standard development in this particular line of French. Here, there are so many different moves that black could play. B6 is one, rook b8 is another, rook f8 with the idea of b6 and knight f8, redeploying the knight to this area is another. So here black chose b6 continuation. This is black's bad bishop, so he's trying to deploy the bishop possibly to b7. Also leave himself another option that in case white captures at c5, he has the possibility of pawn takes also. It's white to play, and white played g3.
I'm sorry. Sorry for the noise.
So white just played g3. It's black to play king h8. This is a very good useful move by black in many lines of French defense. Anybody can tell me what's the idea behind this king h8 move?
To prevent the bishop sacrifice on e7?
That's one of the possibilities, yes. What else?
I think rook to g8, and then he's going to push g5.
That's also a possibility, right. It's just, especially with the bishop here, which happens in many lines of French, this is a very good, useful move. And it's really not a waste of time, because it avoids all the headaches of bishop check, queen check, knight check later on. So even though white has not played bishop here in this position, even though it is possible, and in many lines white does that, black is still plays the precautionary move. Because when white played g3, pretty much the idea behind this move is to play bishop h3 either before or after h4 and hitting this pawn. And because black's only counterattack in this position is to attack the front of the pawn chain with f6, this pawn becomes vulnerable. And black doesn't want bishop takes pawn to be with check. And if it's not with check and white takes it, then black would have some counterattacking chances. For example, knight takes here, and this is how he gets his pawn back. And if white takes, then capture the bishop on e6. So this move makes perfect sense, king h8. White to play, sure enough, he continued to h4. Like I said, king side belongs to white in many of the lines of French defense. So this is pretty much what they call a space gaining move. For example, threat of knight here is a real one. And if black plays here, sometimes white doesn't even have to bother to move the knight, because if he takes, this file is going to be problematic for the rest of the game. So after h4, black played f6. Names of which in his book, My System, he talks a great deal about how when you want to attack a pawn chain, you attack the base of the pawn chain. This is the base, right? And black is doing it already. But a modern treatment of this position is also to attack the front of the pawn chain. And in many lines of French, this is a real possibility. Either white will take or black will take. Either way, the f pawn, the f file will open up half open for black. And this is a very common way of counterattacking in French defense by black. Because of this possibility, which by the way black does not have in Caro-Kann defense, French I think is a better line to play against instead of Caro-Kann. If you have not come up with an opening repertoire for yourself as black, I highly recommend French. Because French, there are many people, including myself, they play that for win, not just to draw the game, which is itself is not bad as black. So this is black's counterattack. f6, Ivanchuk decided to take, pawn takes, and black captured with the knight. Often black captures with the knight on this square. Okay, usually after a couple of trades of pawns have been taken place, that's the time to assess the position. What has happened as a result of this pawn trade? Can you guys...
Two half-open files, the E and F or half-open.
To assess a position, you look at 5 factors. Material. Time.
Space.
Okay,
Don't make it up. Material.
Space.
A space. Pawn structure.
the position of the
King safety.
king safety, the position of the pieces, how they
Right, that comes under tactics or mobility, right? Fourth factor. And the last one?
King safety.
Now, we mentioned this king safety not because it's the least important one. As a matter of fact, that is the most important one. The reason we mention it as number 5 is because a lot of times that is not a factor, and both kings are safe. So let's go through this. Material, just one pawn has been traded on its side, not a factor. The space, who has more space?
Close.
Let's say it's roughly equal. Black has 2 pawns on its fourth, white has 3. Okay, roughly equal. Pawn structure,
What?
I'd say black's better off,
Yeah, it's a problem.
black has a backward pawn here.
but so does the G pawn for white.
That G pawn is not backward. White can advance it after with enough preparation. For example, here, or bishop here, and G4, G5. So
The E5 pawn is not really bad.
this pawn is permanently weak. We have many types of pawn weaknesses in chess. Double pawn, isolated pawn, backward pawn. Backward is one of those. What's the definition of a pawn? In order to be backward pawn, it has to meet 3 criteria.
Can't be defended by the pawn.
Cannot be defended with a pawn. Black has already pushed his F pawn and D pawn, so it can only be defended with pieces.
On an open file. Or
It's
something.
exposed on a half open file. Very good. What else?
Advance without getting captured.
Cannot be advanced without losing it. You see, in other words, white has a good bind on this square. This is an outpost, great outpost for white pieces. So this has all the hallmarks of a bad pawn. But that's what happens in French a lot. Black often is stuck with this pawn, which is usually defended with this piece, so it has a purely defensive role in this whole army. Okay, mobility, roughly equal. King safety. White has not decided to castle. Which side do you think he should castle?
Queen side.
Queen side.
Because it's actually, because white's strength is on the king side, sometimes it's okay to castle on the king side, even though you have advanced some pawns. In this particular case, because it's almost impossible for black to get to the white king. So this is the first time I'm going over this game, so I'm not sure which side white castled. But I'm guessing that it was queen side also. So at this point, after knight f6, white played bishop h3. So this is the target that white is aiming at, and he's trying to accentuate the pressure with moves like this, for example. Black to play bishop d7. Ideally, black would like to bring this bishop here and here. But because this pawn is hanging right now, and it could come under attack twice immediately, black may not be able to do that.
You can defend the pawn with queen c8. Or
Right, if white plays knight f6 here, black could defend it one more time with queen c8, with knight here, challenging this knight. So those are some of the possibilities. White to play rook d1. Okay, I was wrong. White did not castle long. Now the question is he going to castle at all?
Probably.
It makes sense, probably actually castle, because it makes no sense to walk the king here. So castling with all this space advantage that he has here looks perfectly safe.
you would walk the king to the queen side.
With these 2 pieces on the way,
No.
a little bit hard, unless he can jump.
No, I mean move them out the way.
Why wouldn't he castle?
Well, he could have. He could have castled.
Yeah, that just looks
Maybe.
But the thing is, black can open these files against the king. And in some lines of French, white does castle long. But more often you see in many lines of Sicilian that white castles long, like Sicilian Dragon or some lines of Najdorf.
Or you prefer-
So after rook d1, black played pawn takes pawn. Okay. He eliminated white's pawn in the center. So white is going to end up with a piece on that square. I think the reason Magnus did this, because white still has not castled. Instead of rook d1, I think white should have castled short. And you see the problem with white king still is stuck in the center. Takes, knight takes. And here black played e5.
So now that pawn is no longer backward.
Right. So, but looks like black could lose the pawn. Knight takes, followed by pawn takes. What's black's compensation? Looks like black is just dropping a pawn. And by the way, that's exactly what happened. So, and we know Magnus won this game, so he probably outplanned his opponent, even though initially lose the pawn.
No, because of d4.
Very good. Because of d4, attacking these two pieces and opening the diagonal of the bishop towards the rook. You see the problem with not castling? So white went for it. Takes, takes, takes. That's what happened. Sure enough, d4 immediately.
Oh, triple attack.
So white played pawn takes knight, and black doesn't have time to take the rook because he takes over here and wins another piece, even though pawn takes pawn is interesting too. King takes, bishop check. So in other words, black has to capture because white's going to lose some material anyway. And what did white do? What should he do?
Take with d4.
He can win that pawn, but that means he loses the whole rook.
So castle.
Castles. This is the best time to do it. And black must capture the piece now.
I would d4.
So which piece should he capture?
The knight.
I'll take the bishop. Since it's open, let's see.
How many of you think black should capture the bishop? Raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many of you think should take the knight? You're in minority. But sometimes it's good to be in minority.
Yeah, I'd say the knight.
He captured the knight. Mainly because it gives more scope to this bishop, and the fact that white has to react. He could trade queens, and black is hoping to do something with this pawn. You see black's bishops, they're much better placed than white's bishops. So, but you could make a good argument for capturing the bishop also.
Just because it's open.
But obviously on taking the bishop, queen takes, it's black who has to worry about finding a good square for his queen.
Also, black loses a pawn.
So it's white to play, and Ivanchuk decided to trade. What's material balance? This again, sometimes you have to do assessment of the position several times in a game when a series of trades have been taking place. And of course, the more you do it, the faster you'll be able to do it. These days, I can assess a position in 30 seconds, all 5 factors, really quick. And you got to do it constantly and many times. So material is equal, not much different in the position. Each has they're both left with what they call long-range pieces. Queen, rooks, and bishops are called long-range pieces. So the position looks very much equal. If anything, when it comes to king position, white's king a little bit closer to the center. So the position from all aspects looks very equal. That means for 2 super GMs, this game under normal circumstances should end up in a draw. So let's see who outplays the other. White traded queens, takes, black took with the A rook. And obviously Ivanchuk is playing for a draw. Make sure he has a draw first. He traded rooks also. So, and now decision time. Pawn takes pawn, or b3 or b4.
Pawn takes pawn.
Okay. Excuse me. Each option has its advantage and disadvantage. The disadvantage of pawn push, b3 or b4, is that this pawn could be problematic later on, especially if somehow this one appears.
Like bishop e4.
Right. Of course, on bishop e4, white has bishop f5. So he will defend it that way. Not immediately, but I mean later on down the road. And plus, in some lines, black may be able to even play rook d2. Doesn't mind the exchange sack because this pawn could be problematic on the 7th row. So In this case, Ivanchuk decided to trade pawns. And after this trade, I think black's position is better. Again, we assess the position based on the 5 factors. Oh, no, I'm sorry. He did not trade. He pushed. Trade, I think, was no good because if you go through the 5 factors again, when it comes to pawn structure, white has 1, 2, 3-point islands. Black has 2. Usually the fewer the better. So that's probably why Ivanchuk decided not to trade. So white played b3 in this position. One thing that is in white's advantage is the fact that, no, I'm sorry, that's equal to number of pawns, bishop pair, everything looks equal. This shows the genius of Magnus Carlsen before he became world champion to beat a super GM in this very drawish looking position.
Is Rook D2 good now?
Rook D2, is it good now? Of course, the thing is white doesn't have to take it. He can always play Rook F2. And then black has to make a decision.
But then I would trade and then play Bishop E4.
In that case, Bishop E4, yes, that was a good move. So instead of on Rook D2, Rook D2, let's see. Okay, what if white plays bishop here now? That's no good. He has Rook G2 on bishop there. So he pretty much has to take it. On takes, pawn takes. What if white plays Rook here now?
And then you can play Bishop C3.
That's the only move. And all he has to do is to play king here and king here and give up the rook for bishop and pawn. In other words, black gave up the rook for a bishop only, but white will give up his rook for bishop and pawn. And white would be a pawn up, right?
Yeah, same colored bishops.
Right. And that's why I'm guessing black did not do that. Let's see what happened. So in this position, it's black to play, and Carlsen played Rook E8. This is another open file. So now Rook penetration to this square could do something, and white has to make a decision with this bishop. White to play Bishop F2, and what move now?
Rook E2.
Rook E2 is the obvious move. But in this case, Rook E2 doesn't work because white has Bishop F5. So you want to prevent Bishop F5 first before you play. G6 leaves this bishop vulnerable. On G6, he could play Bishop takes B6, for example. So black played Bishop E4 first. And you might say, but he's closing the file for the rook. Yes, he does temporarily, but he could go here and then Rook F2. Rook E2. So played Bishop E4 first. This is a very important diagonal for black to occupy, for either one really. I like the timing of this that Carlsen made. It's white to play, and what should he do? The obvious move is Rook C1, but there is a tactical flaw with this move. See, this dark square bishop wants to attack this pawn. So this could fail because of G5 looks like a good move, right? Pawn takes, bishop takes, or bishop here attacking that pawn, and if A4, bishop here, and if B4, A5, he will have problem. Therefore, white came up with a creative way to defend the pawn. He played Rook E1 first. Pinned it.
So now Bishop G6.
Bishop G6 is possible, but that means the rooks get traded. And when the rooks get traded, then white moves the bishop here, and then white bishop enjoys a fantastic diagonal.
G8.
What about if black is planning to take here next?
Okay, rook e7.
Rook e7, very good. Now rook is guarded. Black is threatening to win the pawn now. And what should white do now?
Rook e2.
Okay, rook e2 is possible. Anything wrong with rook e2?
Oh, yeah. Bishop
The problem with rook e2 is bishop f3 exclam.
d. Okay.
The point is, if white trades rooks, takes bishop takes, this pawn is hanging, and whatever white does to defend this pawn, a4 or b4, then bishop e4, and wins the c2 pawn. You see, all of a sudden, this pawn is causing a lot of headache for white. So that's why not rook e2, and he played rook c1. It's not very nice to put your rook behind your own pawn, and the pawn has no chance of advancing. It's just ugly situation for a rook. It's black to play, and he wants to open up lines.
G5.
What should he do?
G5.
G5 is not what he played.
H6.
Anything wrong with G5?
H5.
What's the point of H5?
He wants to get to H6 so we can have a mate.
Or he wants to play G5. You see, on G5, white could play
H5.
H5.
Right. That's why it's no good.
And you say, okay, then what about here next?
Right.
Right?
Right.
So in that case, the pawns could get traded. After bishop takes, black sacrificed the pawn, bishop here, and after, say, rook e1,
Bishop takes c2.
bishop takes c2, rook takes, bishop takes. The trouble is there's this check at the end. So black must prevent h5 first. So what should he do?
H5.
He plays his own h5. This is here. You see, there you really got to prepare so much. Make sure you don't get caught with an unexpected check at the very end. Nice move. But actually, it looks like with or without h5, takes, takes, bishop takes, look like this check might come at the end anyway. So let's see. Of course, black is going to have to take care of its king position. So after h5, white played the bishop to g2. He's hoping that black will take, and of course, if black takes, very much it's going to be a drawish game, and white would have better position because of more active king than black's. So on bishop g2, black played bishop f5, avoiding trades, and it's still on this diagonal because he's hoping to do something on c2.
Threatening rook e2.
So after bishop f5, white to play bishop f3, preventing rook e2, attacking this pawn. Black defended the pawn, g6, no reason to give up. Sometime in position like this, if you lose one pawn, that's pretty much the game. After g6, white to play a4. This is an undefended pawn, so might as well advance it. We said black has to improve his king position, so at the very end, he will not come under check with on this diagonal. King h7 makes sense. White to play. White really doesn't have much to do here. And is this rook, 5-point piece, is there stuck because of this 3-point piece. So you could say black is maybe an exchange ahead. So white played b4 for lack of really anything useful to do. I'm sure these two pawns against these two pawns not gonna do anything. So now g5 makes sense. And of course, in this case, white again cannot take, because take bishop takes, and this pawn will drop. He's thinking that black will take, I'll take with a pawn, and this bishop cannot go to this diagonal.
What about taking h5?
If taking h5 fails to g4, the bishop can travel.
Oh,
Good point. You saw that? Just kidding. Okay. On g5, white plays a5. He's hoping to trade pawns here and go after the other pawn. After all, bishop is in a good diagonal already. a5, black played g4. Now e2 becomes available. Unless white makes a really ugly move like this, then he's going to be stuck here for a while, even though there's no penetration point for the moment for the rook. But this is really ugly situation. So I doubt it that he did this.
And a rook and a bishop will be pinned down.
So first white played pawn takes pawn. That's an interesting continuation. Of course, on pawn takes bishop, he can take here, and this pawn can be really dangerous, especially when it can't join with his body. They can be really dangerous. So black captured. Pawn takes. And white now played bishop c6. Okay. What's your impression of who has the advantage in this position?
I'd say black because he has the pass pawn. I mean, he has the pawn at c3.
Look like this pawn is doomed, right? But after rook e2, this pawn would be gone too.
Right.
The only difference is that white will have a pass pawn, and black already has a pass pawn here too. So the position is very close. It's really hard to assess positions like this. And I'm not saying black is better because I know the results already. It's really very close position. Objectively, I would say this is a very equal looking position. Again, I don't think anybody can say that black is winning this. One way to tell, by the way, when it comes to activity of pieces, is compare the position of the pieces. Position of this rook with this rook. Obviously, this is more active. Position of two bishops, which are roughly active, neither side has any advantage. These pawns are locked up, not a factor. So the only thing that I could say is this pawn is a little bit closer to queening, two squares. That can be problematic. So in this position, after bishop c6, black played rook e2. Sure enough, white took the pawn. Okay. What about rook over here? Does it win one of the bishops?
no,
E5.
pawn b5.
Right. Black to play piece optimization. Bishop here on e5. White to play, what should he do?
Push.
Bishop.
Anything wrong with bishop coming back?
We have rook.
And hold on to the pawn.
Looks good to me.
And then clear the path for this pawn also.
Maybe rook takes c2.
Yeah.
I can only think a half a move ahead.
Yeah, rook takes here looks perfectly good. So that's not what happened.
Not even a full move.
In this position, white pushed now. The point of this move is that if black takes over here, white will move the bishop here, and this pawn would be gone. So, but it seems that white is sacrificing two pawns to win that one pawn. Of course, white already won a pawn here. So white played b5, black to play king g7.
Can't black just also takes the c2 pawn right now?
Yes, he can. C2 pawn is not defendable. So black is not rushing.
Okay.
He's improving his position. This is not going to go away. There's no way white can defend it.
Also, there's a trap in there.
What kind of trap?
If black takes with the bishop, then rook takes bishop e4 check. So
Rook
king
takes-
e7 walks out of that.
Rook takes e4 check.
No. So if the king is on h7,
Uh-huh.
black plays bishop takes c2,
Uh-huh.
then after rook
Oh, yeah, of course. That's the reason Carlsen moved his king.
Oh.
Because if bishop takes, to see this diagonal, rook takes, bishop check. So king g7, good precautionary move. Good point.
Like I said, I can only think half of that.
White to play bishop a5. So not so much to win this pawn, which he can't, but he's about to advance his b pawn. So the position really looks equal. It takes the slightest mishap in such positions to lose the game. It's black to play and now capture the pawn. Rook takes c2. So rook takes, bishop takes, and this bishop is beautifully placed here, supporting his own pawn, controlling the queen square of this pawn. So you can compare the position of the pieces again. Dark square bishop is much better placed than white's dark square bishop. And this one is closer to queen square, so this already looks pretty dangerous. So king f2, trying to bring the king, and hopefully with the king be able to stop the pawn. And of course, you don't want to let the king get too close to you, to your pawns. So bishop d3. Now, of course, king here fails to c2. So bishop here, king here, and he did not play c2. Of course, on c2, white could have played bishop here, and then black moved the bishop away. But Carlsen moved the bishop away now. Bishop g6, and white is hoping to trade bishops so he can activate his king. This was probably the decisive mistake by white. Now position is winning for black. If we give this to an engine, it says like black is like 8 points ahead. That means winning. So black to play and win.
Bishop takes g3.
He has that, but then it drops this one with a check. So c2. And white has absolutely one move.
Bishop d2.
Bishop d2. This is the only move to stop the pawn from queening. And black to play and win.
Now bishop takes. Where's the bishop c3?
It's black to play. This pawn is not under threat of capture now.
Oh, bishop takes bishop.
One continuation could be bishop takes, king takes, bishop here,
Right.
but it doesn't work because of b6. And when he queens, bishop takes, bishop takes, b7, and the black bishop doesn't have this square.
Gosh.
Calculation. Actually, this is relatively simple because all the lines are forced. When the lines are forced either by checks or captures or such obvious moves like this, it's easy to calculate. It's not too hard to calculate. So here, black decided to increase his advantage.
Bishop
What
takes g3.
about bishop c3?
It just moves the bishop to c1, and black doesn't have bishop here either.
Bishop takes g3.
Another reason bishop c3 doesn't work is because bishop takes bishop. And after king takes, pawn push. And if he ever takes here, king takes, and he's fine. So we have a principle in endings. It's called principle of two weaknesses. White has this weakness, this very advanced black pawn here. But it's not enough to win.
Bishop c3.
Yeah, somebody mentioned bishop c3. White doesn't have to do anything. He can just trade this and push the pawn.
What about
So black created another weakness. That one weakness sometimes is not enough to win the game. But with two weaknesses, in the end, two small weaknesses, that could be decisive. So how can black have extra advantage in this position? Like I said, this pawn is not in the danger of capture right now. So that means this bishop is free.
So can't black
He's controlling the queen square already, but why not win a couple of pawns too? You see again the position of, the reason black wins this because the superior position of dark square bishop versus this bishop. And it's easy to tell and judge right now, but it shows the genius of Carlsen, who anticipated this position many moves ago, and now we see the fruits of it. So bishop takes g3. That's what I meant by two weaknesses. All of a sudden, now there are two pass pawns. So it's white to play. White to play, what should he do? He trades these bishops. Bishop takes, king takes, and His Majesty is dealing with this prudent pawn, king d3. So it's black to play. What should he do?
Just take the pawn h4.
bishop e1.
I'm not so sure.
If the guard b8. Just in case.
It's still easy to go wrong in this position. For example, this bishop takes pawn,
King takes.
may fail to,
Bishop f4 goes to bishop g3.
on bishop f4, he can even push,
Or bishop g3.
or bishop g3 he cannot take. So he probably would push. When bishop takes here, pawn push. But in the game, he did not take this pawn. Black played bishop f2. So by the time he stopped this pawn, and by the time this king takes this pawn, black is going to win a bishop here. But it's still a very tricky position, because if he takes this and black wins this bishop for this pawn, that means we have a wrong rook pawn and a bishop. You see, this bishop is opposite color of the queen square. That's why this game is so fantastic. So even with all this, the game could end up in a draw. It's white to play. He must eliminate this pawn. King takes c2, and black played g3. So white should be able to sacrifice this bishop for this pawn. So what's his only move?
Bishop f4.
Bishop f4. And after g2,
Bishop h2.
bishop h2. Okay. It's black to play.
King f5.
Bishop takes h4.
What's the point of king f5?
You have to enter the square.
Right, like I said, he's not going to win the bishop for this pawn, because after bishop takes, you could say wrong bishop and a rook pawn, or wrong rook pawn and a bishop, because bishop is opposite color of the queen square. But what if the black king comes all the way here? Where is this bishop going to go now? He has to keep an eye on this square, and this diagonal is already so limited. So after king f5, white resigned. It's easy to see in this position why white lost, but many moves ago, Carlsen anticipated this position, this ending. One of the very close endings, even at the very end, the material is still equal. But what decided earlier, because this better position of dark square bishop and now better position of the king. Fantastic game by Carlsen in 2011. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Okay, time for a break.